Many of us know the story of Lincoln and his efforts to free the slaves. During this turbulent time, the idea of abolishing slavery was far-fetched. After all, slave owners would lose a lot of money and social norms would have to change. What many people don't know is that 16 years before Abraham Lincoln, another man ran for president on a similar platform. This presidential candidate was Joseph Smith. When you peel back the pre-Columbian history of the United States, you might just find the Book of Mormon. Hidden in the Heartland. One connection presented in the evidence of the Book of Mormon comes in the words given by certain prophets calling their home the Promised Land. If the land of the Nephites is known as a land of liberty, where would this be? Some say that the United States would be considered that land.
The ancient prophets put so much effort in trying to warn a specific nation not to let the secret combinations, they call them, that destroyed their nations, to destroy the nations that were going to be here in the latter days. When you understand that they were trying to warn that particular nation of what efficacy are those prophecies, if we don't even understand what nation it was they were trying to warn.
People say all the time in this debate about where the Book of Mormon happened, why does it even matter? It doesn't matter where it happened, it just matters that it happened. Well, in the context of the American Covenant, it does matter.
Tim Ballard, author of the American Covenant series, explains the deeper connection between the establishment of the United States and the Promised Land spoken of in the Book of Mormon.
We know about promised lands. The Lord gave Israel's a promised land, and Latter-day Saints would agree it's a promised land. It's a defined place. There's borders and boundaries. So why would that rule not apply today to the covenant land? Why is it that every significant thing that was prophesied of, the promised land, happens here? Nephi sees visions of what's happening in the promised land that he's standing in. He says, later on, people will come. He called them the Gentiles. They will come. And there's going to be Christopher Columbus, and then the settlers will come, and there's going to be this war, the revolution. He sees it all happening in this promised land. If this was the promised land, you see, God makes a covenant with the land. The dirt actually is sacred land that he's designated. If we know that the Nephites walked right here where we are in America, and that we're walking on the same covenant land as defined by God, then guess what? We're going to learn real quick that we're under covenant, and we better start living that covenant. George Washington and this revolutionary generation, they didn't get this concept of the covenant in a vacuum. They didn't just invent it. The first settlers in America believed the same thing and practiced the same thing. In fact, it was the first settlers, the Pilgrims and the Puritans, who come here calling themselves the New Israel. So much so that they named their children Hebrew names. They named their first settlements after Israelite towns. Salem, for example, it's from Jerusalem. It's April 30th, 1789. To me, the most important day in American history. This is the day that George Washington takes his oath of office and becomes the first president of the United States. Really, in effect, it's the day the Constitution comes into being. And so what does he do? Of course, when he addresses the nation for the first time, he addresses the very thing that brought them to this point. He addresses the covenant, and he teaches the people. He says to them, quote, "The smiles of heaven can never be expected upon a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right, which heaven itself has ordained." He then goes out, he asks for a Bible to take his oath. He raises his arm to the square, which is a covenant sign and symbol. He knows this. And he places his hand, not just on the Bible, but in the Bible. The place where George Washington had his hand was right over the words in Genesis 49. The words that begin, "Joseph is a fruitful bough, whose branches run over the wall." This is Jacob, or Israel, blessing his son Joseph, blessing him with a land over the wall, over the great waters, a land of liberty and protection and prosperity. If you read the whole blessing, it's very poetic and beautiful, and it's talking about this land that the people of Joseph will inherit someday. This promise to Joseph is the promise of America. It's the prophecy of the Book of Mormon that a group of people from Joseph will come to America. And Lehi is very clear that they are from Joseph. This is very important. They're fulfilling this promise.
George Washington, after his inaugural address as the first president of the United States, led a procession of people to St. Paul's Chapel in New York City, where it is said he read scriptures and prayed.
He comes down to the people and he says, come with me. In effect, what he's doing here is he's calling for the first joint session of Congress. Now, it's interesting because he has the senators, he has the representatives, newly elected, in the federal hall. He already has them there, but that's not good enough. He leads them into St. Paul's Chapel. In they go. And the first joint session of Congress in the United States, in essence, is a prayer in a church. This is significant. It's the day the covenant of America was renewed. The same covenant that was made and broken and made again and broken in the Book of Mormon. It's made again. It's as part of the restoration of the gospel, really, is made again on April 30th, 1789, and led by General George Washington.
Oh, Mr. President, it's so good to see you.
Good to see you also.
I have your books right over here. I'll be right back.
Thank you.
There you are, Mr. President.
Thank you.
You are
very
very
much.
welcome. You have a wonderful day, sir.
Abraham Lincoln comes in presiding over a war that began before he even got there. In fact, he stands before the nation and says, I'm not touching slavery. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to do anything to alter or amend the Constitution. And he makes all these promises. Come back, South. We don't want you to leave. Everything is as it should be. We can make it that way. The problem that Lincoln doesn't know at the time is that everything is not as it should be.
Tim Ballard shares the story behind Abraham Lincoln and his relationship with God, as recalled in his book, The Lincolnhypothesis.
Lincoln goes through unbelievable hardship. Already he's losing a war he should be winning. Friends are betraying him on every side. And then the parental nightmare of all nightmare hits him in the middle of his darkest moment. His son, his best friend, Willie, who's only 11 years old at the time, is taken from him. He calls for a nurse from the military hospital to come help take care of his other son because his wife, in the wake of Willie's death, is an absolute mess. Rebecca Pomeroy is this nurse, and she comes in, and this woman is full of the Spirit, and she's full of love and life. And Lincoln can't understand it because this woman has lost her husband and 2 of her 3 children. And Lincoln's thinking, she has it worse than me, and I can hardly breathe. And he asks her, how do you go about being so happy? And she responds, I met God. And it's during this time that Lincoln starts to go through what he calls a process of crystallization. Historians have called it his Damascus Road experience. The amazing thing is that Abraham Lincoln, just a couple months before Willie dies, he goes to the Library of Congress and signs out for a copy of the Book of Mormon.
Evidence from this card shows that Abraham Lincoln checked out the Book of Mormon from the Library of Congress, along with other books on Mormonism. What his intentions were in checking out these items is unknown, but Ballard presents a theory based on historical accounts.
He has that book with him during the time that Willie's dying, that Nurse Pomeroy is teaching, that he's going to his cabinet and telling them, I think God wills this contest. I think there's this national sin. This is the consequence. All these principles of the Book of Mormon, he has the book. The book is months and months overdue. He turns it back in 7 days before he issues his first draft of the Emancipation Proclamation to his cabinet. From that point on, if you study Lincoln's speeches, everything that comes out of his mouth after that, when he's talking about the national solution, all comes back to the covenant on this land. Repent, people. Fast and pray. Turn to God. That's what's going to end this war. It's the only thing that will end this war. He understands that.
I'm not a Mormon, but I do play one on TV.
Are you a Christian?
On Big Love, the HBO series that has been a real headache for Romney. Here's the problem. He dare not discuss his religion. This man stood there and said to you, "This is the faith of my fathers." And you and none of these commentators who like this speech realize that the faith of his father is a racist faith. And when he talks about the faith of his father, how about the faith of his great-grandfather who had 5 wives?
Well, look, my great-grandfather had slaves. And I don't believe in slavery.
And his religion is based on the work of a lying, fraudulent criminal named Joseph Smith, who was a racist, who was pro-slavery. His religion was completely pro-slavery.
Joseph was not racist whatsoever. In fact, he was the opposite.
The discussion of race has plagued the Mormon Church for years, especially since the policy change in 1978, where all worthy males can hold the priesthood.
As of 1978, it was an officially racist faith, and for political convenience, in 1978, it switched. And it said, okay, black people can be in this church.
Joseph allowed for African Americans to come in and participate fully in all ordinances, in the temple, in every kind of worship. He himself presided over the ordination of black Latter-day Saints. Elijah Abel being one of them, who was actually ordained and sent off as a Melchizedek priesthood holder and a missionary.
There were blacks who held the priesthood during Joseph Smith's time. And there were also people who it wasn't clear whether they were black or whether they were white. And some of those people were able to hold the priesthood, others of them were not.
Modern-day tales have painted the church into this corner, like much of history in today's politically correct world. Many of us know the story of Lincoln and his efforts to free the slaves. What many people don't know is that 16 years before Abraham Lincoln, another man ran for president on a similar platform. To abolish slavery, his idea was to sell all the land the government owned at the time and give it to the slave owners in exchange for the freedom of all slaves. It was a forward-thinking move that wasn't popular with certain key citizens. This presidential candidate was Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith runs for the presidency in 1844. This is a fact that, as LDS people, we either don't know about it or we kind of run from it. It makes perfect sense that the prophet of God would have run for president during this time. He wasn't just a prophet for the church, he was a prophet for the world. And he certainly understood the very thing that the great national leaders of the Book of Mormon understood about America, that it was a covenant land. And he was trying to fix America. His job wasn't just to fix the church. The church and the nation, really, one was made for the other. So unless you have a fixed nation, the church is going to suffer, and that's what Joseph recognized. Joseph, in 1833, is praying to God, asking him, why on earth the saints aren't receiving the blessings of the Constitution? And the Lord responds, Joseph, I gave the Constitution. I set it up. It is inspired. It's not being applied correctly. He says, go to the judge. And if that doesn't work, go to the governor. And if that doesn't work, go to the President of the United States. Tell them to fix it. And Joseph does all those things. He goes to the judge. No response. He goes to the governor. The governor says, I can't help you. I don't really care. He goes to the president. Same response.
On the frontier, guess who was in charge of enforcing the law? You know, it was the local militia. They were sort of removed, too, from the rest of America. We were more a group of states back then as opposed to the United States, the whole federal government. So these people were feeling like they made the law, they enforced the law. It was a violent world. And so that was how they dealt with their problems that they were facing.
Because what's happening in 19th century America, the dirty little secret of 19th century America, is that the states in the Union could literally opt out of the Bill of Rights. They did not have to enforce the Bill of Rights. So the extermination order against the saints, legal. Slavery, legal. Why? Because everybody had the interpretation of the Constitution that only the federal government had to be restricted by this wonderful thing called the Bill of Rights. But the states could do what they wanted to. which is why Joseph said that the states' rights doctrine are what feed mobs. They're a dead carcass and a stink offering in the nose of the Almighty. Joseph wanted to fix that.
In 1844, Joseph Smith ran for president, along with Sidney Rigdon as vice president.
Joseph Smith's presidential platform in 1844, there was two pillars that were prominent. One was we need to get the Constitution applied everywhere. The states must sign on to the Bill of Rights, and it must be enforced, if necessary, by the federal government. Freedom must be enforced. Another pillar, we must get rid of slavery. We must eradicate slavery in this land. And those two pillars of his platform become. We actually get them in the end. It takes a war, and it takes bloodshed, and it takes a prophesied scourging in the land to get it, but we get it. We get it in the 13th and 14th Amendments, fruits of the Civil War. How does the nation respond as Joseph is running for the presidency? Few people understand this. Joseph was killed in the middle of his candidacy for president. He was killed in June 1844 while he was running for president, while he was pushing forth these ideas. He wasn't just martyred, he was assassinated. As a budding national politician, he was assassinated.
Sadly, his ideas were so far ahead of their time that many could not handle the changes. The campaign was cut short when Joseph Smith was murdered in an upper room at the Carthage jail in Carthage, Illinois.
The most important factor that contributed to Joseph Smith's death was the time period. In Jacksonian America, mob activity was a very typical way to handle an enormous amount of problems. They were not all that far from the Revolutionary War. They were worried about losing the freedoms that they had earned through so much blood. So there was a lot of conspiracy theories going around as to, oh, this group is going to take over America, and this group is going to take over America.
By 1839, the Mormons moved into Nauvoo, Illinois, after fleeing persecution from Missouri. This multiplied the population of Hancock County many times over, causing a rift between the saints and the existing settlers.
The Mormons move in masse and just dwarfed the rest of the population. They lose power at the polls, they lose economic power. Some of them are converting to Mormonism. They hear rumblings from Nauvoo that Joseph Smith is running for president. So all these things just ran together to make the community worried about what in the heck is happening up at Nauvoo.
Like the slaves and the Native Americans, the Mormons suffered persecution, except this time it was to the point of being kicked out of the Union. Never before has a group of religious people ever been exiled from the United States, and rarely has a presidential candidate been murdered before an election.
Brother Joseph, these gentlemen would like a word with you.
A couple weeks ago, an associate of ours had us help uncover a mound. We went about 10 feet deep and we discovered this.
Hidden in the Heartland.